This is the theoretical fastest Rubik's Cube solve. Don't blink, because you'll miss it. According to the World Cube Association, or WCA, which is the organization that oversees all official Rubik's Cube speed solving competitions, this scramble is completely possible and completely legal in competition. So I just theoretically broke the current world record of 3.08 seconds by an insane margin. But the keyword here is theoretical. Let me explain. First, let's set the rules. I have to conduct a completely WCA legal solve on a WCA legal scramble following all of the guidelines. However, outside what is expressly written, I can do anything and manipulate luck as much as I want. In other words, I can set up any circumstance that could ever possibly occur. So in order to develop the theoretically fastest Rubik's Cube solve, we have to consider reducing our time on 3 different parts of the solve. Starting the cube timer, actually solving the cube, and of course, stopping the timer. First, let's consider starting and stopping the timer. In regards to starting the solve, the WCA is pretty clear about what you should do. First, the puzzle must be completely on the mat and not touching the timer. Then you must start the timer with your fingertips without touching the puzzle. Then, in regards to stopping the solve, the WCA is also pretty clear. You must stop the timer with both hands placed palm down, not necessarily with your fingers, and again, not touching the puzzle. So it seems that there's not much we can do to cut time here. I have to put both hands on the timer, go manipulate the cube somehow, and put both hands back down. Or do I? You see, the timer start and stop sequence requires both hands on the timer. Thus, in order to start it, I only have to lift one hand. And similarly to stop, I can just simply put that one hand back down. The WCA regulations never say anything about this. In fact, this is the strategy that most one-handed Rubik's Cube solvers, including myself, use in competition. And since we want to cut down time as much as possible, it's better to only move one hand, since that way we don't have to wait until both hands are back down to stop the timer. Only one. But at this point, you might be wondering, I've just limited myself to one hand. Isn't that just simply slower than using both hands to solve the cube? But the fact is, where we're going, we only need one hand to do the solve. Here's where it gets fun. Now let's talk about the solve itself and the scramble for the solve. This is where the heavily theoretical part primarily comes in. To be honest, there are a small number of regulations when it comes to describing scrambles for 3x3s. In general, the WCA requires random state scrambles that take 2 moves to solve, according to regulation 4b3. Random state simply means that instead of generating scrambles based off a series of random moves, it simply chooses one of the many possible states that the cube can possibly be in with equal probability, and then calculates the algorithm to get to that point instead of starting with the algorithm first. That fact doesn't really help us cut time. However, the fact that the minimum number of required moves is 2 does help, since there's a small, really small chance that this can actually happen. And if what we're trying to do is get the theoretical best time, that 2-move scramble is definitely the way to go. Hopefully now you're kind of figuring out why we only needed one hand. The time saved from the timer stop is sufficient to compensate for only one hand with 2 moves. But now the question is, which 2 moves? First, let's figure out how the WCA defines one move or a turn. According to regulation 12A1, moves include 90 degrees clockwise and counterclockwise moves like this and this, as well as full 180-degree moves like this. Thus, while by some standards the easiest and fastest way to do these 2 moves would be a single double 90-degree rotation or a double move, according to WCA standards, we actually need 2 separate turns, not one double turn like that. So at this point, it seems that for our 2 moves, you might be thinking we can do something like R and U, which seems pretty fast already. But we can do better. This comes down to another quirk the WCA regulation has about moves. By the same regulation 12A1, slice moves like this count as 2 moves, not 1, because it actually counts as 2 outer block turns like this. And that is exactly what we are going to exploit. Turn 2 sides at the same time, specifically the top and bottom sides together, like this. And that still counts as 2 moves. Here's why this is optimal. First of all, compared to a normal 2 turns, we can actually turn top and bottom at the same time, instead of having to wait for one move to finish and then doing the other move. This can also be done just as fast with one hand as 2 hands, since I really don't need the other hand to be doing these 2 moves. So our timer starting and stopping mechanism is completely optimal. And finally, by doing U prime and D, it requires minimum wrist moving. I can start the timer, move my hand forward, pick up the cube, do the 2 moves, and put my hands down without turning my wrists at all. And with that, let's put it all together and walk through what the theoretically fastest solve could be. First, of course, I start with a legal 2-move scramble according to regulation 4b3. Then I put the cube on the mat as the regulations demand and start the timer with my fingers. Then, keeping the right hand on the timer, I will lift my left hand and go directly into a dual U''D move like this, solving the 2-move scramble. And then, after putting the cube back on the mat, I quickly move my hand back to stop the timer. And just like that, we've planned out the theoretically fastest WCA solve. Here's how it looks altogether in lifetime. And if you want to follow along, the WCA legal scramble in this case is just simply UD prime. And again, don't blink because you'll miss it. Finally, if you're curious as to just how theoretical this is, we can actually calculate it. First, let's figure out how many 2-move scrambles like we predicted earlier can possibly happen. Since on each axis we can have 2 such slice move scrambles, clockwise and counterclockwise, we have a total of 3 axes times 2 scrambles per axis for a total of 6 ideal scrambles. The total number of WCA legal scrambles is around 43 quintillion. The couple hundred or so that are invalid are negligible compared to the insanely large denominator. So 6 out of 43 quintillion is approximately a probability of 1.4 times 10 to the negative 19th power. For reference, this means that this can occur once every 7.2 times 10 to the 18th power solves. That's 1 out of every 7.2 quintillion solves. It's believable that in the entire world ever, cubes have only ever been solved less than 100 billion times. Let's be conservative and say that number is around a trillion. Even so, we would have to solve cubes more than 7.2 million times more than what we've currently solved to get one of the scrambles that we discussed in this video to happen. Something like this. So with that being said, is this solve ever going to happen? No, but is it possible? Theoretically, yes. And as far as I'm concerned, that's all that matters. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.